So, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn on PAS 2080. The focus on today's Lunch and Learn is to share some insights, really, about how PAS 2080 is tackling the climate emergency by reducing carbon throughout emissions throughout the building life cycle in terms of infrastructure and highways. So, we're delighted to have some great speakers for you. Obviously, there is opportunities to kind of engage with them both on the chat and afterwards as well, which I encourage. And obviously, one of the things that we want to get out of today's session is to really kind of inspire you into some action. So if you're not already on the journey with PAS 2080, start to think about how your organization can play a part in it. And perhaps we can decode some of the kind of debunk some of the myths around these standards and how you interpret them, and really start to get some renewed engagement on decarbonisation. So we're running from 12 till 1 p.m. We'll keep it fairly short in terms of introducing some of the key points as well, but really let the Q&A speak for itself. So really, we're going to keep the chat open as the speakers come off their individual presentations. Hopefully, they'll engage with some of the comments in the chat as well, but we'll follow up afterwards as well. So it is being recorded. You'll get a copy of the slides and the recording as well. And again, just please use the chat for the Q&A. So I'm Chris Williams-Lilly, Senior Consultant on Climate and Carbon with the Supply Chain School, and really helping facilitate today's session. As well as you all know, with the school, there's quite a lot of information there as well in terms of climate and carbon. And I encourage you to complete the pathways for highways. These are new kind of modules that have been put together in your own time. And also it can demonstrate your knowledge and commitment to decarbonisation. And there's a badge and certification on completion. So you'll get links to all these afterwards as well. So really, I'd like to introduce Mark Emmett, who's the Net Zero Carbon Team Leader, and hopefully will explain how the National Highways intend to use their net zero plan and how PAS 2080, 2023 aligns with and supports their ambition for carbon reduction targets. So Mark, the floor is yours. I'll advance the slides as you wish. Just give me the nod. So yeah, over to you, Mark.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me now clear. So, yeah, we'll cover a little bit now on PAS 2080, 2023, how National Highways is embedding that in the company, and also how that links to some of our other activities, including our contracting for carbon policy. Right, please. Thanks. So I won't go into too much detail here because probably most of you on the session today have seen our net zero highways plans, and we have the three sort of overarching net zero plan commitments that for our corporate emissions, which cover things like vehicles, offices, etc., we will be a net zero as a company by 2030. For all of our construction and maintenance activities, we are working to be a net zero as a company by 2040. That fundamentally covers things like materials, including their manufacturing usage, how materials, plant, etc., are delivered to our sites, and also how we actually deliver our activities on site. And also National Highways is committed to supporting net zero travel on the strategic road network by 2050. So that is in accordance with the government's net zero target. Unsurprisingly, the majority of that relates to things such as tailpipe emissions from cars, buses, HGVs. Right, please. Brilliant. So yeah, again, probably many of you on the call will be aware that PAS 2080, 2023 was updated. I think it was just over a year ago, and is now termed carbon management and built into an infrastructure, and sort of specifies builds on the original 2016 standard around the management of whole life carbon. I think some of the key takeaways from that updated standard very much linked to things like covered there. It certainly sets up a lot more detailed requirements on the value chain around things like making sure that they all have a role and responsibility, effective leadership, maximising opportunities for whole life carbon reductions at every single stage of the delivery process, selecting and identifying appropriate carbon emission assessment methodologies, setting appropriate carbon reduction targets, with that determining baselines against which to assess those carbon reductions, establishing metrics, for example, key performance indicators for credible carbon emissions monitoring and reporting. Big part of it, again, covering a bit more detail in a few moments, is integrating carbon management into procurement activities. and also one which takes over. And I think it's probably the one area that I think everyone is probably fairly reasonably aware of with past 2080 is that continual improvement of carbon management and performance. So yeah, sort of understanding that it's a constantly evolving, moving piece, and that if you achieve past 2080 as an organization, I think the analogy I use is sometimes famous, like passing a driving test, is that you do that little bit of learning up front, you get what you need in place to get past 2080 validated. And it's only then once you start delivering to that carbon management system, that's when the real learning, that continual improvement takes place. Yeah.
Just bear there for a second.
Yeah, so there have been some changes to the original carbon reduction hierarchy that was included within past 2080, 2016, particularly the terminology. So originally it sort of spoke about things like build nothing, build less, build clever, and build efficiently. I think speaking to colleagues across the sector, there is some recognition that some of the changes to the terminology perhaps aren't as helpful, but ultimately the sort of thought process and sort of the categorization doesn't really change that much. So again, looking at avoid opportunity does very much align with build nothing in terms of if you are involved in sort of scheme identification, scheme development, as National Highways would be, if at that early stage sort of option assessments and sort of actually thinking, what are the objectives of delivering the scheme? What do we actually need to achieve if we successfully delivered the scheme? And asking those questions, is that scheme still needed? So do we actually need to build a multi-lane dual carriageway offline, or can we improve what's there already? So can we just widen what we've got existing? Or even potentially, do we actually need the scheme? Is there the potential that the objectives, the challenges, the problems identified in the scheme could actually be delivered by another method, e.g. investing in public transport, investing in active travel, etc. But also thinking about making best use of what we've got already. So can existing assets be repurposed? So can you actually think about, we've got a fairly good usable network now. If we bring that up to latest standards, if we manage and maintain that appropriately, are we potentially achieving the same objectives? Then sort of thinking about the switch again probably does align quite well with build less, build clever. It's actually thinking about, okay, we are now designing and delivering this activity. What can we actually do to make sure that we get that as the whole life from sort of cradle to grave, and then sort of including maintenance, management, etc. What can we really do to drive down carbon? So it's looking at things that, looking at different types of designs, asking yourself questions like, do we actually need to have 3 structures, 3 bridges on this road? Can we actually get away with 2? Do we actually need 4 or 5 concrete retaining walls? Can we actually look at earthwork opportunities instead? Can we look at alternative technologies for actually the way we actually design and build the project? Again, looking at scope, what alternative options, opportunities have we got? What type of materials are we looking at? Are we looking to specify a material that perhaps doesn't have a particularly low carbon impact during construction, but actually when you look at that whole life carbon impact of that material over say a 30, 40, 50, 60-year life cycle, actually you do reap the benefits that way. It's thinking about that bigger whole life picture. And I think perhaps the more sort of strategic change that we've seen is around build efficiently is now sort of change to improve. And this is more, again, really hitting home on this whole life impact, actually thinking that how can we build that scheme that allows it to be built, but also managed, delivered, operated in a low carbon way. So how can we actually drive down whole life carbon? Don't just walk away once you've delivered the scheme as the designer and the constructor and say, right, it's over to the maintaining authority. It's for them to work. But what can we do to make sure that we minimize or even ultimately reduce or remove carbon right away from the whole life cycle of that project? So again, links to things like circular economy. So we've got examples, for example, within National Highways where we're repurposing end of life road restraint systems, where there are a small number of companies that are actually able to retest, recalibrate those barrier sections, and then potentially make them available perhaps for local authorities, etc. So it's thinking about that much bigger picture.
Thank you, Mark.
I think this is probably sort of the one thing to highlight is that past 2018, particularly the 2023 standard, is relevant to all parts of the value chain. And I think that statement there from the recent DICE supported guidance document is really key to that. with smaller organizations, but also some of the other niche smaller micro enterprises, and often bring great benefits to the decarbonisation of projects and programs of work. So everyone can have their say, everyone has their role, their opportunity to be involved in decarbonisation. And so this sort of the 6 binding principles of PAS 2080, and I know colleagues from the call today will cover some of these in terms of the clauses later on this afternoon. So we run the carbon management system, so it's integrating all of the requirements of clauses of PAS 2080 in business management systems through a carbon management system. Leadership is a real key one, so that consideration of decarbonisation as a key primary business objective. That message comes right from the top. You are a company or an organisation that is committed to supporting decarbonisation. Also, around building capabilities, sort of you've given your staff, your colleagues, the confidence, the sort of power to sort of act on carbon reduction, and giving them the opportunity to sort of question, encourage, challenge, etc., influence others to actually say, "I've got a great idea here. It's a little bit sort of off the ball, but let's have a think about it." Again, I think the one big change, past 2080, 2016, in theory, did cover whole life carbon, but very much that has been strengthened in the 2023 standard. So it's looking at that real whole life carbon data set to help inform decision making, and that's again at the asset network and at the system level. So it's using that whole life data to make real informed, strong, confident decisions. Again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, there's a big focus and aspect on procurement as well. We're looking at how you can apply and use commercial models and also factor decarbonisation in decision making to help incentivize our supply chain to actually start thinking about, okay, we can be confident by going to the client and saying, this is the best low carbon option. This is the reason why. Yes, it is going to cost initially, again, talking about whole life, it is perhaps that initial upfront cost might be slightly higher, but actually over the lifetime, the life cycle of that intervention, it will actually pay for itself, for example. And then, yeah, the key one again, linking to sort of leadership as well is collaboration. So very much in that sort of being relevant to all parts of the value chain is you work collaboratively with all members of the value chain, promote collaboration, sharing knowledge, experience, and yeah, building things like carbon management workshops, for example, giving everyone perhaps the opportunity to get involved rather than perhaps a small number of key carbon specialists. It's, somebody has a view, somebody has a thought, why not take it on board? Just briefly cover this section now. So yeah, National Highways became the first major roads organisation in the world to achieve PAS 2080 verification back initially in November 2022. That was against the 2016 standard. We are the first major road organisation worldwide to achieve the verification, and yet we will continue to be PAS 2080 audited every year. Again, where it comes to again continual improvement. So the carbon management system, which is our overarching process document, is also supported by a number of processes. So for those who may be involved on National Highways projects may have heard of the PCF carbon management report, but also perhaps some of those, perhaps more so on operations and renewals. We have the 3D and CDMT processes. They've been adapted, they've been adjusted to include carbon management as well. Yeah, we're very proud to say that we were successfully revalidated to the 2023 standard in December last year. Also very proud that we came through with no non-conformities or opportunities for improvement. I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword of my personal view is that, yes, it is very good to sort of step back a little bit and say, yeah, National Highways are very proud of what we've done, but actually, I'll use that term again, continual improvement. You cannot stand still, that this is an area that is constantly evolving, and it is actually learning from the industry, learning from sector, learning from suppliers, learn from each other, that actually things have to keep on moving forward. That again, through revalidation every year, you will have to show that you haven't just sat back and said, yeah, we've got a carbon management system that does the job. Okay. So one thing that we've been asked through National Highways for quite a few of our suppliers, I said we have a commitment that all of our large and medium suppliers who are directly contracted to National Highways on maintenance and construction contracts must have carbon management systems in place that are verified by the end of 2025 to PAS 2080. We've had a lot of questions from our supply chain understanding sort of how did National Highways go through it, what went well, what didn't go so well. So we've developed this idea here that, yeah, we understand also that some suppliers have actually flagged concerns that there may not be achieve verification in the timeline set by National Highways. There's some debate at the moment in terms of what companies are capable of undertaking PAS 2080 audits. There are a relatively small number of companies that have been UCAS verified, which include BSI and LRQA. But I think it's probably worth noting that UCAS verification perhaps isn't the be-all and end-all, because actually UCAS do not verify PAS 2080 specifically. Those companies that do say to will say to you, yes, we are a UCAS verified company. That is actually verified of business management systems. Well, obviously, those companies will say, well, PAS 2080 is a business management system. So I think that's something that we as an industry and a sector are keen to do with UCAS. There's certainly a lot of interest with UCAS around perhaps developing knowledge and capability so they can actually directly start verifying companies to undertake PAS 2080 audits. But that's obviously going to take a while. So I think from here, though, I think, again, using that term again, continuous improvement, that starts right from the beginning. So when sort of undertaking that initial high-level gap analysis or understanding, yeah, as a company, yeah, we want to go for PAS 2080. We've got sign up from our senior leaders. Yeah, we're going for it. That real first point is sort of understanding, actually, we've looked at all of PAS 2080 clauses. We think we've got a good amount in this area, but we've got some gaps here. We've got some areas for improvement there. And it's very much sort of then saying, okay, how do we address those gaps? How do we close those gaps? How do we start engaging with the people who are perhaps the specialists in my company in those areas? How do we start pulling all the evidence together? But yeah, very much the recommendation is once you are really committed to going for PAS 2080, start speaking with PAS 2080 verifiers as soon as you can. There are companies, of course, that offer the dual service in terms of they will develop everything or support development of everything that's on that screen there. So they will do the gap analysis for you. They will help develop the action plan. And then right at the end, another part of that company then will undertake the independent validation. Of course, also for quite a few of the larger organizations who already have good, strong sustainability, environment, net zero teams, as within National Highways, they may say, okay, we're more than confident, capable of doing that ourselves. We will only look to procure the independent validation. Again, it's just worth speaking to those organizations. Once you're really committed to saying, let's make a start and let's go for it, start that engagement now, because yeah, with some companies, they are really struggling at the moment to actually have qualified auditors to support demand. And yeah, so sort of stage one then is very much a very high level evidence review that would be undertaken generally offline by the auditors, but occasionally they will want to come and speak to the people that develop that evidence. And then stage two can take anything up to 7 to 10 days, where it's a real deep dive into that evidence, where the auditor will sort of particularly call out specific areas where they say, oh, really interested to know a little bit more of that. Really want to speak to your senior leadership teams to actually say, you say within your evidence that your chief executive, your directors are really pushing net zero. Can we go and speak to them, for example? So yeah, but no two audits are the same. But I think, yeah, the one thing I would sort of just keep on emphasizing here is once you've got that commitment in place that you want to achieve PAS 2080, start engaging with suppliers as soon as possible. Thank you. So I think, yeah, sort of building on some of those there. So within National Highways, the carbon management system, we developed that with support from technical specialists and then audited by an independent verifier. We were very lucky that at the time we had some consultants working for National Highways that were heavily involved in both development of the original 2016 standard and the 2023 standard. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, there are quite a few companies there and also some consultants as well who will provide both services, including LRQA and BSI, that will actually take you through the whole journey and then independently verify your carbon management systems right at the end. Again, as I mentioned before, if you choose independent verification, absolutely seek engagement with auditors as early as possible. So once you've got a contact, once you've got a contract, for example, and they say, yeah, we can start talking about dates. Good lesson that we learned is that no two auditors have the same preference. And the example here that we had with our audits is our initial evidence pack was evidence that was collated into specific PAS 2080 folders, which worked really well for our first auditor. The secondary auditor then that provided support said, that's absolutely fine, but actually I've got a list of 22 different people or different teams within your company, projects I want to speak to. Can you put the evidence into those folders? So no two approaches are the same. So I think that's also worth bearing in mind, is that yeah, you need to be planned to be flexible, I think. But also, yeah, do not second guess who the auditor will want to engage with, particularly in the larger organizations. I think our view is it's better to get people primed, prepared, and perhaps say to them, actually change your plan, you're not needed now, rather than for it to be suddenly dropped to say, I want to speak to the chief executive, I want to speak to a senior director, or I want to speak to one of our environmental advisors, for example. It is, if you think they may be involved or may need to be involved, get them involved and just have them ready just in case. And again, we talk about that continual improvement again, but a carbon management system doesn't have to be perfect. Equally, providing improvements or action plans for areas that you think, okay, we're going to audit, we need to do a bit of work here, but we've got a forward plan to do it. That is equally good and will be equally recognised as strong evidence, because it shows that you're constantly maturing, developing an organisation, that you don't just say, yep, we've got everything that we think we need, we haven't got to worry about doing any more. But also, again, I think, as I mentioned a few moments ago with National Highways, if you are fortunate enough to receive verification with no non-conformities or areas for improvement, please, whatever you do, don't take that as a reason to discount that need for continual improvement. Okay, so just briefly cover this. So some of you on the call may have heard of this before, but back in June last year, National Highways provided or launched its contracting carbon and contracts policy, which at this time applies for all future contracts, predominantly for construction and maintenance at this time. But there is work underway to review existing contracts, and the policy will ultimately apply where the senior responsible officer considers that the implementation to be economic and affordable. So yeah, ultimately the overarching requirement of the policy is that at the bottom is that all suppliers will commit to meet the key aims set out in the net zero plan, basically looking much bigger than construction and maintenance, but also, again, supporting our corporate and our road user commitments as well. But yeah, there is also a strong focus on construction and maintenance related activities. So yeah, work is underway to sort of start developing set stage carbon caps for a contract and scheme. So actually a carbon budget in another form. Linking to that then is around how we establish and manage any residual emissions. So we will be setting a carbon price that we will publish at the base date of each road investment period. So that's basically a willingness to pay for sort of low or zero carbon interventions. Covering as going back to what I was covering a few moments ago. So our large and medium suppliers who are involved in construction and maintenance contracts directly contracted with National Highways will have to be PAS 2080 certified by 2025. But we are providing an exemption for some of the small and micro suppliers who bizarrely do actually get directly contracted, National Highways. There's also a requirement that our net zero plan targets are currently with the Science Based Targets Initiative for validation. If we are successfully validated, that is on the basis that where 70% of our strategic spend goes to, then those organizations will have to also set their own SBTI aligned targets within 5 years of National Highways submitting theirs, and ours was submitted on the 19th of December. As I understand, having a look at that list of the strategic suppliers at the moment, unsurprisingly, I think of the 35, 32, 33 are predominantly large contractors and consultants who work for National Highways on our major project and are already either SBTI recognised or are working toward getting the target validated. And also one that we've learned lessons from Lower Thames Crossing and actually really links well with our environmental sustainability strategy is that we'll be looking to set a requirement that for future project suppliers will have to be committed to achieving a BREEAM standard of very good or better. So that's the BREEAM infrastructure standard, the old SEQUEL standard. Originally it came through the carbon elements, but actually when you look into the detail, it covers things such as biodiversity, land use, heritage, pollution. It has real strong links to some of the objectives and the commitments we have in our environmental sustainability strategy. Thank you. And also, one big area that National Highways has been really committed to doing is that we want to knowledge share and collaborate with our supply chain, with our peers, with universities, etc. So we have National Highways Carbon Hub, includes a significant amount of information that is constantly evolving. It has things, for example, including training webinars, the Net Zero Knowledge Zone. Got a copy of our carbon management system and guidance on PAS 2080 for suppliers. It's got the link to low carbon opportunities register that we have. We're building a bit more capability around our case studies. We have a lot that we've pulled together. It's just getting it into one place, but also details on how you can support innovation and work with national highways on trials on the strategic road network. There's a link there as well, but also hopefully the QR code doesn't work. Sorry, should work. If it doesn't work, if you have any issues, please drop my team an email via the email address at the bottom, carbon@nationalhighways.gov.uk. And I think just as we go to a close, I think, yeah, I know we do get a lot of questions. We do get a lot of challenges around standards being the blockers where ideas, proposals are ultimately discounted or turned down on the basis that they don't align with MCHW and DMRB. So yeah, this is just an example here of where, yeah, we do look at them on a case-by-case basis, but I think also we do recognise that there probably is some more work to do around departures and relaxations from standards, including sort of upskilling those who are reviewing and sort of ultimately proving those standards to actually understand, yeah, okay, this does depart from standard, but actually the evidence they've provided in terms of the estimated carbon reduction savings are credible. So yeah, we do recognise that there is perhaps some more work to do in this area if we are going to be recognised as a company that supports innovation. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Mark. Quite a lot of detail, and it's actually flagged up quite a lot of really interesting questions. Obviously, not all the same as well. So I'll invite you to maybe, and all the other speakers, if you want to dive into the chat as well to do that. But I think it really helped us understand how highways and the standard dovetails together in meeting those broader net zero objectives, and obviously how procurement can help as well. So with that, we'll move on to our next speaker. So if I can invite Kat to come on board now. Basically, if you're not familiar with Octavius, they are transport, construction and maintenance and infrastructure solutions. And Kat will outline the main challenges and opportunities this standard brings to infrastructure projects. So over to you, Kat.
Hi, thanks very much, Chris, and thanks, Mark. I think setting out how the PAS 2080 journey worked for National Highways is a great way of setting out how it can happen and work for supply chain. So it's been a really useful set of information to share with the supply chain. So thank you for that. So to give you a little bit of context, thank you for the introduction, Chris. So yeah, we work on, we're a smaller tier one, I would say. We've a turnover around 250 million and we've got around 700 people in the business. We work in the SDF, we work in the North East and North West, we work in the RDP framework. We're at Walsgrave on the A46, which is our major project with National Highways at the moment. And we're also doing some work on the A303. And in terms of National Highways, we also work with the M25 Connect Plus, who are responsible for the renewals and maintenance of the M25. So we've got a little bit of a spread around National Highways, and that's useful for us to learn from other people and also learn about different parts of National Highways, embracing things slightly differently. What I'm going to do for you today is take you through the first sessions of the PAS 2080 standard. We are just embarking on a verification this year for ourselves. So we're still, what I would say, in the early stages of embed and practice when it comes to carbon maturity. We've done quite a lot of work in the past around understanding our resilience, allocating champions, setting out our carbon agenda, etc. But we're now really moving into that embed and practice part, which is about our vision, strategy, capability, incentivization, etc. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of, we know why we need to do this and we know what needs to happen because of the standard being really clear, setting it out. But how do you do it? If you're a smaller enterprise, how do you even go about it? And I think that's been the biggest challenge for us, is just making sure that we understand where we play our part in PAS 2080. Do we have control or influence over sections or areas of projects? And do we understand those whole life principles? And what is our response to the carbon hierarchy? And therefore, how do we understand that it's connected not just to a sustainability person, but to the whole part of the business, whether it be the value chain, whether it be commercial, whether it be procurement, whether it be indeed the environmental and sustainability people in our teams. So it's a real understanding about how we've gone about trying to get these PAS 2080 requirements understood by our business. When it comes to leadership, it's absolutely focused on how are you going to demonstrate as a business that, or an organisation, that you are committed to decarbonising the work that you do. And the key thing for how we approached it was to absolutely try and get board buy-in. I have a fortunate position where I actually sit on the board, so I was able to influence the board to make a decision to step into the carbon neutral and net zero zone. But I have had to do a lot of work to canvass operational and commercial directors to understand what it actually means for them. And I would also say, don't think that you start with a blank piece of paper and you have to take on board the whole standard all at once. It can be really, really overwhelming. So what we did was we started by looking at our existing policies and systems, our 14,000 system, our 9,001 system, all the systems we had in place. And another key one that we've really looked at is 44,001 around collaboration, because that is also integral to this standard. So please don't think you just have to start afresh from new. Please use what you've got already. It makes it an awful lot easier to start embedding it into the business rather than having a standalone system or section sitting on its own. So that was the first thing that we did. We then developed our ambition of what we wanted to do around carbon reduction. We wanted to demonstrate carbon neutrality first, which is focused on scope 1 and scope 2, which I'll try and demystify a bit later. And then we started looking at our scope 3 and what were our ambitions around that. We compared ourselves, we looked at other people, we really tried to understand the nuts and bolts. I went around the business and asked people in the business, what did carbon mean to them? And that then led me to identify people and teams who are actually integral to delivery. It can't just be one person doing it for your business. It's too much, and it's therefore just a silo bolt on. It's not a part of your business if you don't include different people, whether it be your supply chain teams, whether it be your commercial teams. I've found QSs to be very, very helpful in the carbon agenda because they understand what we've bought. And by understanding what you've bought, you can then do an equal thought process around what you've spent in terms of carbon. So think about those types of people and how they're integral and sort of do that map around there. Then we really got onto the carbon onto the agenda in some of our meetings. And that was like first time a couple of things, well, what are we going to talk about? And it's like, well, let's start by what have you got control over? And they were like, well, we've got control over the design elements, or we've got control over just the methodologies for construction. And by understanding that, we were able to start thinking about how we brought carbon into the agenda. We then look at capability training. This is really key. How do all the different levels of your business understand what carbon means and how it impacts them? And absolutely, the supply chain sustainability school can absolutely help with that, with all the, as can National Highways, with all the information they've got available. So when you're looking at this, evidence to gather, think about your business plan, think about your IMS system, think about your board minutes and meetings, really challenge the board. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Have carbon discussions, think about your training records, and then think about your purchasing records. This is starting to set your frame for understanding why leadership and setting that ambition is really important. You could move on, please. So section 6 is then about integration, thinking about what and when carbon can be measured in your projects, who needs to be involved, focusing on where the decisions need to be made, building on what Mark was alluding to around, I still like the old-fashioned terminology, but the avoid, switch and improve, but the build nothing, build something, but build it cleverly, and finally build it efficiently. Think about how that works and who's involved. Develop links into your existing project lifecycle and your existing governance processes. Don't recreate a whole new system, as I said before. Think about how you can have hold points within your project lifecycle for measuring carbon and demonstrating that you've done optioneering around carbon, you've thought about different methodologies, etc. That will help you then develop that carbon management process that's really critical to PAS 2080. That will also help you then to identify where you've got control and where you as an organisation or an individual have influence. Are you in the design phases? Are you a designer? Are you a contractor? How do you as a contractor influence the methodologies that have been put into the design? At Walsgrave, we're in the DCO process. And that's really useful because what we're doing now is we're influencing the design with our construction knowledge to start making the design actually benefit from carbon reduction because we're influencing the design based on what we know from construction. So that is really key. We talk a lot about integrating up and down the value chain. That's really important. Do your supply chain understand what you need to, what the asset owners need in the first instance, how that then translates to you as a tier one, and then how that translates to your teams. And that takes an awful lot of engagement. And I would say that was the bit that we are still really working on as a business, because it's massive if you think about your supply chain. Do you understand them, and do they understand you? And that's why collaboration is key. One of the most useful documents I've found personally in order to initiate conversations with supply chain, SMEs that we work with, and the leaders as well, actually, is the Low Carbon Opportunities Register, where you can go to them and say, have you thought about doing this instead? Could we do this? Asking those really simple questions that help then frame a conversation around integration. And one of the key ones is, if I had to do this, how could you help me? And that helps bring the supply chain on the journey and into the thinking and into the decision making. So again, think about that. Think about how everybody impacts onto your project life cycle, and then what your key outputs are going to be from that. And I've just given you a little snapshot in these of some of the things we've been developing in the background as to show the process. Evidence to gather here is demonstrating the project lifecycle, who you've integrated with, who you're involved with, how you're going to collect your baseline data from the designer. What does optioneering really look like? Is it de-scoping? Is it changing materials? Is it looking at new ways of doing something? Is it bringing innovation from a different sector rather? So really thinking about those types of things and demonstrating how the low carbon register is being used. Again, we're finding that quite useful for those conversations. If you could move on. Thanks, Chris. And then another big section, which I think is also quite hard to get your head around, is the whole life. And I've been working in sustainability for 25 years, right? So this is still quite hard. I think it's still quite hard to really challenge things that Mark alluded to, but the different design specifications, really coming up with different construction methods and alternative materials. Often, if you're a contractor, you're coming in quite late into the system, into the process, if you like. And how we can influence those things can be limited, but I think it's always about asking the question, and you'll get a answer that may or may not be possible to reduce carbon, but equally at least people understand what the options could have been. And this is where using your project life cycle is really important. Again, use the low carbon register. It's really helpful. Try and start looking at the credentials and materials and their manufacture from your supply chain. Request those environmental product declarations, sorry, that should say product, not produce, where possible, and discuss. And that will help then you get the evidence that you need to demonstrate through sharing knowledge, through optioneering meetings, collaboration meetings, that you're starting to think about the alternatives that could be there. And again, in the bottom right-hand corner is just some ideas with some processes that we've been using to help us demonstrate those carbon options. So I'm taking you through the first three parts of the PAS 2018. Will later is going to take you through some of the other sections, and Paul later after that. But if I can just move on to the next couple of slides, and then I'll close. The opportunities for using the carbon hierarchy are great, and I've deliberately used avoid, switch, improve, where they sit in the design phases and construction phases. Optioneering plays into this as well around avoid and switch. But as Mark alluded to, the greatest ability to influence whole life carbon is at the need stage, right when we might not be involved. But then when we're in the control and influence stages, here's some of the things that we can do. So we can absolutely de-scope. We can absolutely think about different specifications. We have a tendency as designers to sometimes over-specify, because it protects us in the longer term. But the reality is we need to do the minimum viable option in most cases, and really make sure that that's built with high quality materials and built to the highest quality to then develop your carbon reduction credentials. Use your technology where possible. But here you're looking at your low carbon concrete alternatives, your drainage alternatives, things like using tyre bales for embankments and not earth, reducing your import of aggregates, looking at the supply chain options and using BIM and technology for planning, and also helping you with future interventions if possible. So they're the key areas we've been looking at in the design phase. In the construction phase, it's very much about construction methodology, switching things out, improving what we're doing, using this, or getting the same specification, using less, using those circular economy principles. Inevitably, there's going to be talk about fossil fuel. I can never get to say this, fossil fuel-free sites. And then also about your low carbon welfare, think about your alternative plant and equipment, green travel plans. All those things are going to help frame your evidence in order to help to demonstrate the PAS 2080 requirements. And I think on to my final slide. There are challenges. The language is difficult to navigate sometimes, and trying to demystify it with your teams is one of the critical things to use. I think of it, and how I describe it, is scope 1 is your fuels that you've used, that you've bought. Scope 2 is your electricity that you've used. Scope 3 is everything else. It's the easiest way to define it, but you do need to then set out each of your parts of scope 3 of what you can do and what you can't do. And if you can't do it now, that's okay. You might be able to do it in the future by sharing knowledge, by understanding more, and you'll build up your scope 3 emissions, but take a stab at what you think your scope 3 is. And there's just some ideas there around reduction options, but use your systems. Process is no different from measuring money, but you just need to think of it as a cost in terms of money, in terms of carbon rather, and try and demystify it as far as possible. And I think that's probably me.
Thank you, Kat. That was really, really useful, especially building on some of the successes within your individual, policies and process and systems you've got in there, and being curious. So absolutely fantastic.
It's not easy, but we're all here to help as well.
Yeah, and I guess
it's all of our issue, isn't it? It's not just one person's or one.
Yeah, and it's not to be seen as another hoop to go through as suppliers. It's that maturity, and obviously there is that collaborative approach where systems and processes and techniques are shared among the supply chain. So that's something to really take advantage of. We may run over a little bit, but obviously conscious that there's still a lot of questions being fed through, so some really good stuff. I really want to thank Mark and Kat, and we're going to move on now to Will, and really Will is a carbon advisor with Balfour Beatty, a truly international infrastructure group based in the UK. And I'm sure participants would would like to know more about the updates in obviously how PAS has changed in the last few years, and how we can actually look at carbon reduction hierarchy and how that will impact on how we project plan and moving forward. So if I can move over to you, Will, you take the floor.
Absolutely. Can you just confirm you can hear me all right, Chris? Is that everything?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Fine? Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so just to introduce myself before I get into the detail. Yeah, as Chris just said, I'm a carbon advisor for Balfour Beatty, working in the Balfour Beatty Highways part of the business. I was also the project lead for the Balfour Beatty Highways PAS 2080-2023 project from start to finish. We managed to get across the line to get PAS 2080 for the highways part of the business at the end of 2023. So we were successful in our journey, and hopefully I can provide some insights in that, in that process and that journey that we went through throughout this presentation. So yeah, next slide, please, Chris. So yeah, firstly, I'm going to go to what is PAS 2080 fundamentally looking for. This is just to give you a general flavour of what PAS 2080 is and what it's looking for. I know you've probably found all this out previously through webinars and training sessions and conversations, but this is what it feels like to me, having gone through the process. But before I get into this, I just want to double down on a couple of things that were said by Mark and Kat. Firstly, Mark did mention that there are two main consultants that provide PAS 2080 verification, but there are others in the area. So if you're looking for a non-UCAS accredited, there are other options. As Balfour Beatty Highways, we moved away from BSI and RQA and went for an external consultant called Hydroc. So if you are struggling to get time booked in with BSI and RQA, which they'll be very, very busy with PAS 2080 over the next 2 years, there are other opportunities out there. So just have a look at that. And what I'm going to say here about our PAS 2080 system is we implemented a carbon management system as a first stab at it, but we're very much aware that we're happy with what we produced last year, but as Kat and as Mark said, it's very much continual improvement piece, and we're already in the process of developing new elements and improving elements that we did last year. So yeah, there are two bits are very, very important to double down on. So yeah, back into this slide. Fundamentally, PAS 2080 is looking for an integrated carbon management system that's not a standalone section that's an add-on to your business management systems. It's looking for something that is fundamental to how you run your business and not just a side piece and a tick box exercise. That's very important to note. Next one, please, Chris. Consistent. So what it's looking for is that you can consistently implement PAS 2080 across your portfolio of projects. So that can go from your biggest project to your smallest project. It can be flexible in the way that you implement it. It can be proportionate. It doesn't have to be the same carbon management system for a huge project and the same one for a small project. You can very much filter it and make it applicable to the resource and size of that project. Next one, please, Chris. Resilience. This one's really important. It's already been mentioned previously. I think Kat mentioned it around, is it just what sustainability people do or what carbon individuals do? No, the carbon management system needs to be resilient and it needs to be built across the whole business. So it's not just a sustainability function that's reliant on one individual, the carbon lead or the sustainability lead, because you're very much going to come unstuck throughout your PAS 2080 process, especially if you get resource issues. If that individual leaves, then yeah, that's not a resilient system. So yeah, next one, please, Chris. And then collaborative, as was mentioned, and as I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about in a second, PAS 2080 is looking for you to be very collaborative up and down your value chain. So for Balfour Beatty Highways, you're going up to your major clients, so that's National Highways, and then down to your supply chain, your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, etc. So yeah, it's very much looking for that collaboration piece between you all, which I'll go into a little bit more detail afterwards. Just to note as well, I'm very aware that what Balfour Beatty has to implement is not the same as what a lot of other companies will need to implement. So take this from my experience of implementing this from a large tier 1 contractor. You will not necessarily have to do the same level. You might not have the resource and the team to be able to implement this. This is very much from a big tier 1. So take that when I'm going through all this process with you. So yeah, next slide, please, Chris. I put this slide in here just to give you an idea of what we see carbon being influential on within a business. It's important to note this is not exhaustive. This does not include every element of carbon management influence, but it's just the main sort of headings that you can have a look at. What I would say, so you've got 8 different topics there. You could maybe produce your carbon management plan or your carbon management system based on a number of these different topics. That's what we've done within Balfour Beatty Highways. So we've chosen a few of these 8 different topics, well, all 8 of them actually, and a few others, and built elements of our carbon management plan and carbon management strategy on these different topics. So you've got procurement, supply chain, environment sustainability, design engineering, digital automation, comms and engagement, plant and fleet, and leadership as well. So these will also be the people you need to get involved as early as you can do in the process, because they're going to be the sort of the people who are going to open the doors and the gatekeepers to allowing you to implement PAS 2080. So that's just an idea of who needs to be involved. Next slide, please, Chris. So as Kat said, she went through 5, 6, and 7, the clauses in PAS 2080, 2023. I'm going to go through 8, 9, and 10, just give you an idea of how we implemented that. So yes, next slide, please, Chris. Clause 8. So clause 8 is all about target setting and baselines. It's important to note I've not picked every single PAS 2080 clause within target setting and baselines here. So do not think this is all it is. There is more to it than this. And I've chosen a combination of both asset owners and contractors, because that's what we've had to do as Balfour Beatty Highways. So number 1, adopting carbon reduction targets set by the asset owners. So as Balfour Beatty Highways, what we did is we have general conversations with National Highways and agree targets for each of our individual projects, such as 20% or 30% carbon reduction over the whole life cycle of the project. That's one way that we approached it as Balfour Beatty Highways. One other way that we approached it was having internal targets as well. So we had internal budgets, carbon budgets for all of our projects based on the Balfour Beatty Group decarbonisation targets. So that's another way that you can do it internally. Number 2, communicating and sharing carbon targets with the value chain. So we did that by including carbon targets and carbon budgets in the tender process when we were going out to our suppliers. and saying, look, you want to work on this project, this is what the carbon reduction target is, can you support us throughout that process? Setting a whole life carbon data baseline. So this is very important to note. So it's important that you make your discrepancy between whole life carbon and upfront carbon or capital carbon at the start of the project. You can say, and this is what we did as Balfour Beatty Highways, you can say to the consultant, we have influence over whole life carbon. We're able to go to National Highways or go to our designers and say, we've realized this material that allows us to reduce the maintenance requirements of the highway structure. But our main influence is over A1 to A5. So that is from materials and products all the way through to construction. So we made it very clear to our consultant that A1 to A5 is where our real influence lies. So what I would say is lead your consultant down that road and say, look, this is where we really have influence. You don't need to worry about demolition and use as much because your contract probably says A1 to A5. So that's just a little tidbit there that you can use. Identify limitations of the accuracy of setting baselines. So clearly outline the assumptions and the guidance that you followed when setting your baselines. That's really important. You can include that in your carbon management plan and your strategy. So state that you're following the RICS whole life carbon assessment process throughout your baseline setting process. Number 5, challenge the asset owner to mutually agree a baseline and target. So this is just about being collaborative with the asset owner. So for Balfour Beatty Highways, that's being collaborative with National Highways. So just saying that we think we would a good, ambitious but achievable target might be 20 or 30%, and we'll make that agreement with National Highways on what we do. So you could then make that agreement with your client throughout your project lifecycle. Recommend improvements to the asset owner. Again, this is just about being collaborative. So this could be maybe sending an email or keeping meeting minutes of you've identified a part of the process that's not as optimum as it could be. Email your client or have a meeting with your client and record it and say that, yeah, we've identified this problem in your target setting process. This is how we would potentially like to see it being improved. Next slide, please, Chris. Oh, just jump on that. There you go. So clause 9, monitoring and reporting. So number 1, identify monitoring and reporting roles and responsibilities. So what we did in Balfour Beatty Highways was to include a roles and responsibilities matrix within our carbon management plan, so that every time you need to know who on a specific project is required to support with getting data from the supply chain, you go to the commercial manager, for example, and that's the way that we did it. We also, what we did is upskilled people on carbon reporting and monitoring, but also included a full process of carbon monitoring and reporting within our carbon management plan, so that anybody in 5 years' time can come into Balfour Beatty Highways, pick up the carbon management plan and do carbon reporting on a project. That's a way that we took a bit of the risk out of it and made it resilient and flexible across our projects. Reporting whole life carbon, again, this is dependent on your client. National Highways asks Balfour Beatty to report A1 to A5 primarily throughout their carbon reporting process. It's important that we stick to what our client is asking us to do and make that clear to our consultant. Keep records on low carbon options. So this was mentioned earlier by Kat. So you can use the National Highways low carbon opportunities tracker as a way to get out your case studies across the supply chain. So that's one way of doing it. We also have individual trackers and registers for each individual project for how to monitor and improve low carbon options on the projects. Share good practice outcomes with the value chain. So as I said earlier, that could be through webinars, that could be through case studies, that could be through inviting the value chain into your carbon workshops. We just did a range of all these different options. We also have an option for our suppliers to contact Balfour Beatty and say, we need access to your carbon specialists because we need support in maturing our system. We are able to provide that support as well through our supply chain engagement process. Identify, recommend improvements to the asset owner's approach. Again, as I said earlier, it's around being collaborative and being open and honest with your client and saying, look, we think this could be improved by doing X, Y, and Z. And that could be emails and meeting minutes as well. So yeah, next slide, please, Chris. Finally, going to go on to procurement. So procurement is really important because clause 10 is brand new within PAS 2080-2023, as was mentioned earlier. there was a new revision sent out last year. Procurement wasn't in it in 2016, but is in 2023. So it's really important that you get the procurement bit right, because there's going to be quite a lot of focus from the external consultants on this particular clause. Prioritize whole life carbon as a performance driver. So what we do is we put it in our tender packages, put it in our tender question sets, and put it in our contracts with our suppliers on our projects to say, look, you've said that you can provide 50% EV, for example, in this package. We're going to put that as a KPI and a tracker in your contract to make sure that you are driving that throughout the life cycle of the project. And provide regular updates to the project's performance. So we do that by inviting suppliers into our carbon workshops and going through individual project performance to date on carbon. But also we send out regular updates on a monthly basis, stating that for this project, this is how we're performing against the carbon baseline and against the reduction target as well. Identify carbon reduction measures included in the tender responses. So what we did is we did a mix of having the tender responses done by a carbon or sustainability specialist, and also training the commercial team so they feel confident in reviewing tender responses and capturing all the reduction opportunities in there. And then engaging with the asset owners, value chain, to identify solutions that are acceptable for all parties. So we did this by shifting left. That's our philosophy, and getting suppliers on board as early as possible in the process to make sure that everybody's happy with the carbon reduction targets that are in play, and then being collaborative with the value chain. So again, getting suppliers involved in carbon workshops, hosting PAS 2080 webinars. There's a whole range of things that we can do to collaborate across our value chain. And that's just a touch on procurement. There's a lot more to it. So if anybody's got any questions around that, feel free to put it in the chat or come to me directly through my email. So yeah, thank you all very much. That was it from me on clauses 8, 9, and 10. I'll pass on to Paul to go from here.
Oh, thank you. Well, really appreciate that, and also reminding us resources will be different for each individual organisation, but to get a snapshot of what a major contractor is doing is really useful. So really, yeah, with time conscious, I know Lorraine said that we are running over a little bit, so hopefully you can stay with us. We've got Paul now, who's the Sustainability Director with WJ Group, a specialist road marking and highway safety contractor. And hopefully Paul will share his insights on how PAS 2080 is being received across the SME community. So over to you, Paul.
Hi everybody. So I'll have the next slide, please. This is how we've looked at this PAS 2080 within our organisations. We've taken a systems-based approach to climate change and net zero. Flip on to the next one, please, Chris. As an organisation, we do a lot of work with national highways, so we're on SDF, and we do a lot of work on the RDP, where we're tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. For us, this whole system has to fit in with what we do, and it fits in beautifully, and I'll go on to demonstrate that. So as an organisation, we have a vision of safe, sustainable journeys for everybody, underpinned by a sustainability vision that says, our future's up to us. We're the drivers of a just transition, and that must enable nature and future generations to thrive. So that's where we're coming from with this. So moving on a slide, please, Chris. How does this work for us? PAS 2080 to us is a very much collaborative process. And how this is where we fit into it and how it works for us in our organisation. You could very easily say that this is section 1, so scope from PAS 2080. So everything we do is aligned with the Paris Agreement and the UK Climate Change Act. Those are sort of the fundamental pieces behind everything that we're doing here. But we also like to map it against the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because we feel that is a wonderful framework for doing anything to do with sustainability. So in this particular case, we're looking at Goal 13. But anyone who thinks that zero hunger can be achieved without achieving net zero is living in a different world, I would suggest. But this whole collaborative journey is really part of it. So for us, it's about promoting the use of sustainable products and the circular economy, overcoming the green premium. And at the moment, obviously, there's lots and lots of technology coming onto the market, but it's often coming at a cost. And that difference between the sort of low carbon materials or equipment and what's standardly available at the moment would be defined as the green premium. So that's a big part of it. Life cycle assessment, really big in this whole agenda. What we're doing, we've just been touching on that. Measuring of carbon and sustainability, and understanding the environmental impact on jobs and operations. Once again, these are fundamentals to how we do this, and I'll go through and explain how this works for us. That's more or less the scope. So if we have the next slide, please, Chris. So I don't know how many people are aware of this, but it's really sort of, this was a communique that was released by the International Accreditation Forum at ISO on 22nd of February this year. And this is about adding carbon change considerations into management systems. So that is through Annex SL, which all these systems are based on. So 9001, 14,001, 45,001, 44,001 in these systems. It says that an organisation should determine whether climate change is a relevant issue. That's now in these management systems. So it's fundamental beyond past 2080. It's fundamental to your management systems. And this second part, 4.2 from this communique, was understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. And it says here in part of this communique, relevant interested parties can have requirements related to climate change, which brings us perfectly into this agenda here with what we're talking with National Highways here, but it's, for us, it's a large part of our customer base and interesting parties. It's kind of fundamental here. So if I could have the next slide, please, Chris. This rather complicated looking slide is how our management systems work. So along the top line, we've got, as I say, 9001, 45,001, 14,001. This grayed out one is our compliance plan that we have for greenhouse gas and energy. The other two along the top are fleet management, which we do through FORS, obviously massive environmental impact, hard to abate, and 44,001, which, as everybody's mentioned, is fundamental to that collaboration piece, is fundamental to how we manage this. So dropping down a level, this is our compliance plan and how it works. So with that, we have a net zero management plan. Sitting below that, I'm going along the blue line to the left, and I won't go through all of this, but these few parts are quite important. So then we've got the greenhouse gas protocol. That's what everything's built upon, and that we measure ourselves against that through ISO 14064, but also SBTIs, as Mark mentioned, and PPN 0621. We spent a lot of time speaking about 0620 in this industry, where 0621 is that managing the carbon, your net zero line. Beyond that, we have our past 2080, that's our certification management plan for this, which is what we're talking about here. And that's how we collaborate that with the rest of our supply chain, both up and down. And then below that, we have our certification management plan. So that's for energy, 50,001, and below that is for our manufacturing of materials and vehicles. So it's with that past 2050 and ISO 14067, which is footprinting of materials, ISO 14040, which is also a carbon management scheme for processes. So if we pick the area here, we move down to the green area. So we have a series of documents. We have net zero energy management, the scope document, objectives and strategy document, risk registers, reduction opportunities, and evaluation. That falls then into all those documents form part of this past 2080, which we have a project reduction plan if it's a particular project, or the whole thing fits into our global reduction plan. Then moving on beyond that, we have evidence folders for what we're doing, because obviously, we can say we're doing something, we have to keep that evidence somewhere to make that work for us and be able to share that with the rest of the supply chain. And then beyond that, it's this whole, the value chain collaboration piece. So if that's how it fits in, all the other documents fit together. I can't go through them now, but the top right, I think, is quite important, how the people management thing, because as everyone's been saying, we need to speak the language. And it's okay for people like me who can sit here and talk and roll out all these numbers that don't mean anything to anybody apart from the people who are professionally involved. What we have to do is train our people in understanding and be able to be involved in the conversation. Our management team, our supervisors going out on site saying, okay, have you thought about this? Because this can potentially, this is a lower carbon material that we may be able to use, or let's look at the efficiency of this delivery. That's a really fundamental to delivering low carbon. Make sure your plan for delivery actually is efficient and works. It's simple efficiency and managing the energy, if you like, reducing the energy as much as you can, because that will reduce the carbon. To do that whole process, we use our 44,001 procedures. We have a maturity matrix, which is developed from the 44,001 for our people. So we just can look at how their learning is going in this sphere and how we can help it and give them extra learning to be able to be more involved in the process, because it cannot just be, as everyone else has said, it's not just a single person job, this. And the more that people understand how to get involved and we demystify it, the better off we are. So that's how the system works. We'll carry on to the next one, please, Chris. So once again, we're back to these sections from past 2080. So decarbonisation principles, this works for us. So it's about whole life carbon. As I've said, we sort of not only are a tier 2 contractor, but we also manufacture our materials and our plant. So that gives us a lot of control around this whole life carbon. It's working with our supply chain and bringing their developments into what we do. It's been very successful for us. But the next part, influence and control. National highways. Obviously, Mark spoke about concrete. If concrete was a country, I believe it would be third highest emitter behind the USA and Canada. Road markings don't quite fit in that whole sphere. If you look at National Highways sort of carbon intensity pie chart, we're less than 1%. So we're not, that sort of control and influence perhaps isn't there. But if you can join in the conversation, we're never going to get to net zero if we don't include everybody. And if you've got people who can articulate where they are and bring what they're doing, it's that marginal gains that really going to help us as an industry. So yeah, you're going to look for the low-hanging fruit, and that's what we've done within our sphere. We can't go much beyond that. So this whole thing works in that sort of decision-making process for us. Carbon hierarchy has been very important, so avoiding, switching, and improving. And we've done some big things around switching and improving within what we do, and then how we bring the circular economy into this. And for us, that's worked very well through our manufacturing our materials. We've got a really good handle on where everything comes from, and that's helped us bring that. And that's where we sit then in this whole piece around, we sit in the constructors part and the suppliers part of this whole drawing. But if you look in the drawing to the bottom left, that sort of all those big carbon savings hit in that sort of optioneering design piece. But if you're articulate, if your people can share learning, then that we can have an input in there. And what's efficient for us will be efficient for the rest of the supply chain, I would suggest. So next slide, please, Chris. All the way through this journey, one of the things that's been really important to us is making sure that we get everything that we do verified, because I can sit here and I can talk about this, but why should or would you believe me? So we've gone down the line of verifying everything we do. As I said at the beginning, we measure ourselves against the greenhouse gas protocol. That's our scope 1, 2, and 3, and Planet Mark measure that for us against ISO 14064, and we also signed up to SBTIs. We should be hopefully getting verification for that towards the end of this year, but there's a big queue for that as well as everything else at the moment. But once again, carbon footprint of products, that life cycle piece, where do our products come from? How can we look at that life cycle is about where the product comes from, transport to our facilities for manufacture, the energy we used in manufacture, and the waste. That's that sort of A1 to A3 part that Will was just talking about. 4 and 5 moving on to site, but this whole piece is really important. This PAS 2080 verification process has worked really, really well for us. So like National Highways, we went through the process and we had no non-conformances, no OFIs, no findings at all, which we were really delighted for. This shows that the system that we put together seemed to work. Can I have the next slide, please? So this collaboration and inclusion piece, I believe, is vital, because if National Highways put this in 2080, that gives us all the voice in this whole piece. And I think that is really, really important, because National Highways can't meet their targets without the supply chain, and that's us. And we're going right back quite deep into our supply chain here, and it gives us an opportunity to bring ideas forward and demonstrate what we've done. Things that we've done, we can share as case studies or however much. So it's about taking that greenhouse gas reduction goals and sharing it with the wider value chain. There's a big governance piece here, but it's a collaborative process, and it should work from the top to the bottom. And I think it does for us in this case. There are potentially issues about to overcome around IP in this whole piece, but I think that sort of, we can cope with that. And these things over to our right is how we've worked with in our value chain to sort of bring bio-based products to replace hydrocarbons. And that's just given us an enormous reduction in our embedded carbon in our materials, over 80%. And that's working with our supply chain and taking that knowledge that we've learned forward into this whole PAS 2080 piece. And that essentially is how this system should work. Have the next slide, please, Chris. So this is the final slide. This is section 11, if you like, is the continual improvement piece. So you need that overarching plan. We fit in through, well, this is through RDP and Supply Chain Sustainability School, who I would say at this point have been, it's been our go-to source of information for a long time. We've been members since the start, and it's really helped us develop our knowledge, and it's a great way of giving our people learning, which certainly works. But we've taken this, we have board level buy-in. I'm a board director, and that whole carbon and sustainability piece is really important. And one of the gratifying things when we did PAS 2080 and they go out and they interview members of our staff saying, how does this work to you? They got it, and they delivered that piece really well. And that was really pleasing from my point of view, as somebody who's sort of, you know, an activist as well as a board member. I think you have to be in my role, get everybody enthused and coming on board. It's a really exciting time in this industry. I wish I was sort of coming at the start of my career rather than at the end of it. There's so many opportunities here, So it's about, we've done the measuring and monitoring piece, those impacts that we might have, but it's developing plans to promote an improvement, this whole continual improvement process. What we know for certain is that our net zero plans are flawed. We don't know the whole journey. There's new technology coming on all the time. It's about learning from that, taking that and bringing it in as we evolve. And it's about skills. It's about people. We can't do this without people. And it's about the whole sort of education piece of learning. We've got to sort of, it's a really inclusive process, this, and we have to sort of make sure that people are included. And that is one of the fundamentals I would suggest about it. Do a lot of work outside the industry, doing a big piece at the moment with BITC on green skills with Newcastle University, Cardiff Business School, Suez, the waste contractors, British Land. And those sort of things, it's taking external learning like that we'll gain from that and bringing it in here and actually doing what we're doing today, so sharing knowledge. So that's it from me. I could go on for another hour, but I think we're up to time.
Do you know, I could listen to you all day, Paul. It's really refreshing. I kind of just, as we wrap up, I think really want to reflect on, Paul, is taking it as kind of as a whole business model approach to forward think about, it's no small piece of work this to undertake it, but it will actually help us deliver projects and leave the environment in a better place than we found it, hopefully. So there's a lot of effort required. There's a whole training piece behind it. And obviously, when you go back through this recording and when you download the free to access public available standard, that PAS 2080, some of the insights that have been shared today are fundamental into getting that first step on the ladder and to get going on it. And I echo Paul's comments about, the opportunities are there, and wish we'd have started this 10 years ago, 20 years ago even. So I kind of want to, thank you all of the speakers for their, insights and some fantastic slides. We have overrun, but I do appreciate everybody that stayed behind to hang on. Go back through the chat when you get it as well. There's some fundamental things that Mark has said. There's other links as well that have been shared for additional training. But I kind of think with that, we've done quite a lot of, walking through the standard, engaging with the supply chain from top to bottom. Thank you again for joining us today. Really enjoyed hearing all of the stories and watching through on the chat as well. So I'll hang on for 5 or 10 minutes as well to stay on. But with that, I wish you all a very good week and thank you for joining us.